For centuries, people have imagined memory as a kind of recording. Something happens, your brain captures it, stores it somewhere inside your mind, and years later, you simply press play. It's an idea so familiar that we almost never question it. We talk about saving memories. We store experiences. We relive moments from the past. Even our language assumes that memory is a kind of archive, a place where yesterday patiently waits for tomorrow. It sounds obvious. After all, when you remember your childhood home, it can feel as though you're looking at it again. When you think about an old conversation, you almost hear the voices. When you recall a birthday, the faces seem to return. It feels like replaying a recording. But feeling and reality are not always the same thing. Imagine watching a home video from 20 years ago. Every time you press play, the recording is identical. The same light, the same voices, the same expressions. Nothing changes simply because you watched it. Now imagine your brain worked the same way. Every experience, perfectly preserved. Every detail, waiting unchanged. That would certainly make memory easier to understand, but it isn't how the brain works. Modern neuroscience paints a very different picture. When you remember something, your brain is not retrieving a recording. It is constructing an experience. It gathers pieces of information, fragments of images, sounds, emotions, sensations, and assembles them into what feels like a seamless memory. The remarkable part is that this happens so quickly and so effortlessly that you never notice the construction. You experience only the finished result, which is why remembering feels so convincing. Not because your brain has replayed the past, but because it has built a version of it that feels complete. And that single realization changes everything. Because if memory is something the brain constructs, then every memory you've ever trusted may be far more dynamic than you ever imagined. Now comes the part that surprises even many neuroscientists. Most people assume that once a memory has been created, it stays the same, locked away somewhere inside the brain, waiting to be remembered. That would seem reasonable. After all, if a memory already exists, why would it need to change? But that's not what researchers have discovered. When you remember an event, your brain doesn't simply observe it. It briefly makes that memory active again. For a short period of time, the memory becomes surprisingly flexible. Not erased, not replaced, but open. Scientists call this process memory reconsolidation. The name sounds complicated. The idea is not. Imagine you've written an important document. Years later, you open the file to read it. But the moment it's open, you notice a sentence that could be clearer. You correct a word, delete another. Perhaps you don't even realize you've made a tiny change. Then you press save. The document still tells the same story, but it is no longer exactly the same document. Research suggests that memory behaves in a remarkably similar way. Each time you recall an experience, your brain briefly returns it to an editable state. Only afterward does it store the memory again. Usually, the changes are so small that they go unnoticed. A detail becomes sharper, another fades. Two similar conversations blend together. A feeling becomes stronger than it originally was. Your present knowledge, your current emotions, even things you've learned since the event, can subtly influence how the memory is stored again. This doesn't mean your memories are constantly becoming false. Most remain broadly reliable. The overall event is often preserved, but the details can shift, slowly, quietly, over time, which leads to a remarkable realization. Remembering is not only a way of visiting the past, it is also one of the ways the past continues to change. And that means every memory you revisit has another chance to change. But memory can do more than change the details of a real event. Sometimes, It can create an event that never happened at all. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus became one of the most influential researchers to explore how easily memory can be altered. In one well-known study, researchers asked participants' relatives to describe several real events from their childhood. The participants were then given those true stories, along with one additional event, a story about becoming lost in a shopping mall as a child. They were told that they had wandered away from their family, become frightened, been found by an unfamiliar adult, and eventually reunited with their parents. There was only one problem. It had never happened. The entire event had been invented. At first, many participants said they had no memory of it, but they were encouraged to keep trying, to picture the shopping mall, to think about how they might have felt, to search for any fragment that seemed familiar. And during later interviews, some participants began to remember. They described fear, confusion, the appearance of the person who helped them. Some even added details that the researchers had never suggested. The false event was beginning to feel like part of their childhood. This did not happen to everyone. And the study did not prove that any memory can be implanted into any mind, but it revealed something deeply unsettling. Under certain conditions, suggestion can become imagination. Imagination can become familiarity, and familiarity can begin to feel like memory. The person is not pretending. They are not deliberately creating a lie. From the inside, the experience can feel completely genuine. How does this happen? Part of the answer lies in something psychologists call source monitoring. Your brain does not only need to remember information, it also needs to remember where that information came from. Did you experience it yourself? Did someone tell you about it? Did you see it in a photograph? Did you imagine it? Did you hear the story so many times that it began to feel familiar? Most of the time, the brain keeps those sources separate, but sometimes the boundaries blur. Imagine finding an old photograph of yourself beside a lake. You don't remember the day, but a relative tells you that you were terrified of the water. You study the photograph. You imagine the cold wind, the sound of the waves, the feeling of holding someone's hand. Years later, you may remember standing beside that lake and feeling afraid. But what exactly are you remembering? The original moment? The photograph? The family story? Or the scene your mind created afterward? You may never know. Family stories are especially powerful. They are repeated at birthdays, at holidays, around dinner tables. The same details are told again and again until they become part of the story of who you are. Perhaps you were always the child who wandered away, the one who cried during a family trip, the one who said something funny at the age of 4. Maybe it happened exactly that way. Maybe the story changed slightly with every retelling. And maybe, at some point, you began remembering the story as an experience of your own. Photographs can have a similar effect. They appear to offer proof, a frozen piece of the past. But a photograph captures only a fraction of a second. Everything outside the frame, the sounds, the emotions, what happened before, what happened after, must still be supplied by the mind. The photograph may be real. The memory built around it may not be. And this is what makes false memories so difficult to recognize. They do not arrive feeling false. They can contain images, emotion, movement, even physical sensations. They may feel just as vivid as events that truly occurred. Because the brain does not judge a memory by comparing it with the past is no longer available. It judges the memory by how coherent it feels now, how familiar it seems, how easily the pieces fit together. And sometimes, a story that never happened fits perfectly. That is why sincerity is not enough, vividness is not enough, certainty is not enough. Because a person can be completely honest, completely convinced, and completely mistaken. Confidence is not evidence. By now, you might be wondering whether false memories are rare, something that happens only in psychology laboratories, only under carefully controlled conditions. But what if the same process happens outside the laboratory? Not to one person, but to thousands. Or even millions. This phenomenon has become known as the Mandela Effect. The name comes from an observation that surprised many researchers. Large numbers of people reported remembering the same event differently from the historical record. Over the years, many similar examples have appeared. A famous movie quote remembered slightly differently. A familiar logo containing a detail that was never there. A childhood book remembered with a different spelling. Whether you personally remember these examples correctly isn't the important question. The important question is, why do so many people make the same mistake? The answer may have less to do with memory itself and more to do with one another. We like to imagine our memories as private, something that belongs only to us. But every day, our memories are shaped by other people. A friend tells a story. A family member remembers an event differently. A movie quote is repeated hundreds of times. A headline simplifies what really happened. A photograph is shared online. A conversation fills in details we had forgotten. Little by little, our memories become social. The brain is constantly comparing its own version of the past with the versions carried by everyone around us. Sometimes, those versions become stronger than the original experience. Not because anyone intended to deceive us, but because repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates confidence. There is another reason these shared memories emerge. Human brains are remarkably similar. We notice the same patterns, complete the same unfinished ideas, make the same assumptions. When information is incomplete, many minds naturally fill the gaps in similar ways. The result is something extraordinary. Thousands of people who have never met can arrive at remarkably similar memories, even when those memories don't perfectly match reality. Scientists study the Mandela Effect not as evidence that history has changed, not as proof of parallel universes, but as a powerful demonstration of how human memory works. Because memory was never meant to exist in isolation. Every conversation, every photograph, every documentary, every story you hear has the potential to become part of your own, which means your memories are shaped not only by your experiences, but also by the experiences of everyone around you. Memory is personal, but it is never completely private. At this point, memory may seem deeply unreliable. It changes, it borrows details, it fills in gaps. It can even create experiences that never happened. So why would evolution build a system like this? Why not give us perfect memories, perfect recordings, stored forever, unchanged? The answer is surprisingly simple, because memory was never designed to preserve reality. It was designed to help you survive it. Imagine one of our distant ancestors walking through a forest. A branch snaps somewhere in the distance. A shadow moves between the trees. A heartbeat later, a predator appears. What information matters most? The exact number of leaves on the ground? The shape of every cloud overhead? The position of every branch? Of course not. What matters is the pattern. A sudden sound, followed by danger. The next time that sound appears, the brain doesn't need a perfect replay of the first encounter. It needs one answer. What should I do now? That single question has shaped millions of years of evolution. Memory is not an archive. It is a prediction engine. Every experience teaches the brain something. What causes pain? What brings safety? Who can be trusted? which food should be avoided, which path leads home. Over time, the details become less important than the lesson. Because lessons save lives, details often do not. In other words, the brain is constantly making a trade. It gives up some precision to gain something far more valuable: the ability to predict. Reality is expensive. Prediction is useful. A perfect record of every second of your life would require an astonishing amount of energy. Every face, every sound, every word, every ordinary moment preserved forever. But the brain has never been interested in keeping everything. It selects, compresses, connects. It asks one question over and over again: will this help me tomorrow? If the answer is yes, the lesson stays. If the answer is no, the details quietly fade away. This is why memory resembles a map more than a photograph. A map leaves out almost everything: the color of the buildings, the shape of the trees, the people walking down the street, the weather, the sounds. And yet, a good map can guide you across an entire country, not because it shows everything, but because it preserves what matters. Your memory works much the same way. It is not trying to recreate your past, it is trying to guide your future. This is also why emotion has such extraordinary power over memory. Fear, love, joy, loss. These experiences tell the brain, pay attention, you may need this again. Even then, the lesson is often remembered more clearly than the details themselves. You may forget the exact words someone spoke, but never forget how they made you feel. You may misremember where you were standing, but remember perfectly why that moment mattered. From an evolutionary perspective, that is not a flaw. It is efficiency. The brain is not asking, how can I preserve the past exactly as it was? It is asking, how can the past help me survive what comes next? And perhaps that changes the way we should think about memory. Its greatest purpose was never to remember yesterday. It was always to prepare you for tomorrow. Up to this point, we've been asking one question: how does memory work? But perhaps that isn't the most important question. Perhaps the real question is, why do we have memory at all? Most of us would answer instinctively: to remember the past. It seems obvious, but modern neuroscience suggests something far more surprising. Memory may exist not only so you can remember yesterday, but so you can imagine tomorrow. Think about something you're planning to do next week: a conversation, a vacation, a job interview, a difficult decision. None of those events has happened yet, and yet you can picture them. You can imagine what you might say, how another person might respond, what could go wrong, what could go right. Where did those imaginary scenes come from? Your brain didn't create them from nothing. It built them using pieces of your past: a face you've seen before, a conversation you've already had, a place you've visited, an emotion you've experienced. Fragments of old memories combined into something entirely new. In other words, the same remarkable system that helps you remember your past also helps you explore your future. Researchers have found that many of the brain networks involved in remembering past experiences are also active when people imagine possible future events. The brain is doing something surprisingly similar in both cases. It is constructing a scene. One is based on what has already happened, the other on what might happen next. Perhaps that is why memory was never meant to be perfectly fixed. A perfect recording can only replay yesterday. A flexible memory can prepare you for tomorrow. It allows you to test possibilities without living through them first, to imagine consequences before making a choice, to learn from experiences even when the future looks completely different from the past. And maybe this is where memory becomes something even larger. Because once you begin imagining different futures, you also begin changing yourself. Every decision you make depends on the future you believe is possible. Every hope, every fear, every ambition begins as a story your brain creates about tomorrow. Which means memory is doing far more than preserving your experiences. It is quietly shaping your expectations, your decisions, your relationships, your future, and perhaps your identity. Because the person you become is influenced not only by what happened to you, but by what your brain believes could happen next. Maybe we've misunderstood memory all along. Maybe it was never built simply to remember the past. Maybe it was built to help you create the future. For most of this journey, we've been talking about memory, how it changes, how it reconstructs, how it quietly rewrites the past. But perhaps memory was never the real subject. Perhaps you were. Think about your life for a moment. Not the individual moments, the whole story. Your childhood, your friendships, your failures, your happiest days, your deepest regrets. None of them exists anymore. Those moments are gone. What remains is the story your mind continues to tell about them. And that story is never still. As you grow older, the same event can mean something entirely different. A painful experience becomes a lesson. An embarrassing mistake becomes something you laugh about. A failure becomes the reason you succeeded later. The past itself has not changed. Only its meaning has. Which leads to a question that is far deeper than memory. If every important memory has changed, if every story has been edited, if your brain keeps rewriting the past, who exactly is remembering? We often imagine that somewhere inside us there is a permanent self, a silent observer watching life unfold, collecting memories like photographs in an album. But perhaps there was never an album. Perhaps there was never a perfectly preserved version of you waiting to be discovered. Perhaps the self is not something you find. It is something you continually create. Every memory you revisit, every meaning you discover, every decision you make adds another sentence to the story. And slowly, almost without noticing, that story becomes the person you believe yourself to be. Perhaps this is why identity feels continuous, even though almost everything about us changes. Our bodies change, our beliefs change, our relationships change, even our memories change. Yet somehow, we still feel like the same person. Maybe not because every memory remained the same, but because the story never stopped connecting them. A story doesn't need every detail to be true. It needs the pieces to make sense together. And perhaps that is exactly what the brain has been doing all along. Not preserving every moment, but weaving countless moments into a life. Maybe you are not your memories. Maybe you are the story that connects them. And perhaps, as long as you are alive, that story is still being written. Before you leave, think once more about your favorite childhood memory, the one that has stayed with you for years. Perhaps it happened exactly as you remember. Perhaps it didn't. You'll probably never know. And strangely, maybe you were never supposed to know. Because memory was never built to preserve every moment exactly as it happened. It was built to carry something far more important: meaning. Every time you remember, the past becomes part of the present. And every time you imagine tomorrow, the present begins shaping the future. Somewhere between those two, a life unfolds. Perhaps your memories don't define who you are. Perhaps Neither do the facts alone. Maybe you are the meaning your mind continues to find. The story that keeps connecting yesterday with tomorrow. And perhaps, as long as that story continues, so do you. Fade to black.